Hey, I'm Eagle Play, and you're listening to The Revenue Formula. In today's episode, we talk about why Outbound will never be the same again, what's changed, and also why we still like it. Oh, such a nice beat. Good to be in the studio again.
Yeah, it feels like a studio.
Yeah.
When do we have the soundproofing?
It's coming. Let's wait for it.
Let's go.
There's just, a little sheet and then a lot of buy links, that we need to get through.
And then it's going to be the Pleo.
Exactly right.
Let's go.
So, while you were off on holiday and really enjoyed, recharging the batteries, I was working from home. And, sometimes you really want to just sit, have lunch, no disturbances, no interruptions. So I sat down and I, switch off my phone, shut down the laptop and just, sat and relaxed. And then there was a ring on the door. And I was like, you know what? I can't be bothered even getting up right now. I just don't let me just sit, relax, and kept ringing. At some point, it also gets a bit awkward because you start thinking, does the person know I'm here or what's going on? And then it turned into a knocking and it got louder and louder. I was like, yeah, still not doing it. It's me time. Stop bothering me. And then all of a sudden, the door was busted open and this guy came in saying, hope you don't mind the persistence, but did you get my email?
And did you get it?
No, probably. I didn't read it. Yeah. But no, this was a fun little story I think Dave Gerhardt told on LinkedIn, right? Mm-hmm. And we're really going to talk about outbound sales today. This is really disturbing the me time. And it's such a funny field because either you really hate it and you have lots of examples of why, or actually you think it's a gold mine. So we're going to talk a bit about outbound today, specifically what's changed or changing and how companies can win.
Let's go.
So you've been, responsible for a lot of different fields, teams, so on in B2B SaaS, outbound being one of them. And I think the first step is really to talk about why should companies prioritize or try out outbound?
Yeah. So I think outbound is awesome. I also think marketing is awesome. I think upsell and partnership and all of that stuff. I think you shouldn't rule anything out just because it has a bad reputation. I think that's already the bad start. I think the reason why outbound is interesting conceptually, let's maybe start on that super high level, is it really is demand generation. When you really think about it, it's not, you're calling a bunch of people and they don't know you, they don't know about your solution, they maybe don't know about the problem, and you kind of educate them actually. You kind of tell them, hey, this is what's up and this is what's down. And when you do that, you are doing exactly what demand generation is trying to achieve also. And you're doing this into a almost infinite TAM, right? It's not only the people that know about you already, which would otherwise go to Google or to review sites already. Those are really the folks that have no effing clue about you at all. You call them up and there are millions, well, probably not millions, but thousands of those. Giving all of them a call will probably kind of help you, right? And the even cooler stuff about it is that, one of the biggest drawbacks and flaws, well, not sure if you would call it a flaw, but issues, friction points of demand gen is the inability to attribute. You do a bunch of work, and yes, your direct and branded traffic is increasing and your demo requests are increasing and your conversion rates and all of that stuff is great. But you can't really pinpoint to the CFO and say this was this podcast episode over there and this was this other thing over there. You will always struggle to do, specific attribution. Yeah. And I sometimes joke and say you can buy 5 dream datas. It's still not going to fix that issue for you, right? However, when you use SDRs, and yes, all of this is also flawed. Don't get me wrong. But hey, that person placed that call. That person had a conversation. That person created the meeting. And then suddenly something closed. And you feel more like there's a direct attribution, which is still not 100% perfect. We all know that. Marketing also plays a big role in, making sure that happens in the end. But that is, for me, really the point of doing outbound, honestly. It's a really nicely scalable channel. It's also something where you can create that spreadsheet and add those people in, and you can see your way how money is going to come out of this. If you do the same exercise with marketing, for example, it's not the same thing, right? And I think this is where some of the excitement about Outbound is coming from those CFOs, from those CEOs, from a bunch of folks, and I share that. But then yet again, only putting all of your efforts into one, on one leg is also the wrong thing to do, right? But Outbound is, I like it as a tactic for sure.
I think we've talked a lot about the confidence level is a lot higher because you have more control and more overview of the actual performance. But there's also the other side to your point, which is, hey, wouldn't it be great if they already knew you when you call? Then it's so much easier, that barrier and that cut through and the job of an SDR, whatever you call it, making that outbound call gets easier. So I totally agree. There's a balance you need to strike. One doesn't rule out the other. And that's a totally, separate episode we can take in the future. Really, how can marketing help? How can all the other departments help? We're going to focus on outbound, and we really like the predictability of it, right? You can spreadsheet a lot of the things out. You know how many calls you can make, how many touch points, meetings, and so on, right? But there's also a lot that's happened over the last couple of years that's changed outbound that we should talk a bit about. And to your knowledge, like when you've worked with outbound just 5 years ago, there was one distinct approach to book a meeting, right? But what's changed today?
I would even go even further back than just the last 5 years, actually. I would go almost to I don't want to call it the inception of Outbound, but basically Aaron Ross, Predictable Revenue, that's the book he wrote. And he developed that methodology. I'm not sure if he really is the guy that figured it out, but probably was around already then. But at least he wrote the book about it. Let's just say it like that.
So he gets the credit.
Attribution. Yeah. Right there. No, but I think he was at Salesforce. And back then at Salesforce, he basically created a list of 100 leads, then emailed them on a Monday, and then called through them throughout the rest of the week. And that was super successful. And then he built a team doing the same thing. And it was also super successful and totally worked. So we're talking, early 2000s, by the way. Yeah. If you today create a list of 100 leads, send them one email, and then call them, it's not going to be the same result. Let me tell you that, right? And I think these things just evolved over the last 2 decades, right? And I think on the one hand side, you have the SDR teams, ramping up and getting better and better and better and smarter, enabled by technology, enabled by more data, enabled by just 20 years of experience and experienced inside sales managers and directors that know this stuff works. But at the same time, you also have a shoring up of defenses on the other side. You have phone systems that tell you when there's an outbound call hitting you. You have Google and all the other email providers basically labeling, oh, this is spam. This is someone reaching out. This could even be what is it called? This hook thing, when this could be a scam kind of email, right? Yeah. Phishing. There you have it. Basically, it's kind of making it much, much harder for you to actually break through, right? So you have those two defenses kind of building up. And I think this will probably continue indefinitely, actually. I don't think outbound will be declared dead anytime soon. I think that was said now 10 years ago and 5 years ago, and still being said today. But I don't think that that will happen anytime soon, honestly. And when we started out with outbounds, I think it's also now 10 years ago. I think it's 10 years ago now, actually.
Yeah, probably,
Yeah, it was July 2012 or something like that. Crazy.
Man, time flies.
Time does fly. And the first time I saw it, I was like, come on. That's obviously not going to work. What, you're going to call a bunch of people and tell them, hey, I want to sell you something for 20,000 euros? And they say, yeah, let's do that.
I immediately trust you.
Yeah. And I was putting myself into that position. I was like, well, would I buy like this? And I was like, no, I wouldn't buy like this. It's totally stupid. But it does work. It really does work, right? And I think, the initial reaction of, hey, that doesn't work, it's still there, but it still works though, right? So I don't know.
I think it's also, if that's your mindset, that hey, I hate outbound because I don't like being spam, so we're never going to build this out in our company, that's a really bad way to make decisions, actually. You should at least try and remove, that perception and try it out.
Yeah.
And then it can be that maybe it doesn't work for you for whatever reason, the ASPs doesn't justify it or whatever. But I think that applies not just to outbound, but to everything, because you said it before, outbound has been labeled dead many times. The same for email, same for search engine optimization. Yep. And guess what? There are still people calling. There are still people doing SEO, still people sending email marketing, and it works. But
I think the way I would almost think about it is, let's just say on your website, you have a couple of different CTAs. You have one CTA that's sign up for the newsletter. You have one CTA that's start a trial. And then you have one talk to sales. And all of these three things, they might work for different people at different places in their buying process. Yeah. And I think all of these different tactics that we're talking about on the go-to-market side, they work for different kinds of people, and even sometimes in different points in their careers, sometimes in different points where they are sitting in the hierarchy, sometimes different points in their buying cycle. And you want to actually try and deploy all of those different tactics in order to access all of the different people at the different time, right? And outbound certainly has its point and its value. Just kind of building it the right way and angling it the right way, that just needs as much tweaking and work and thought as potentially all of your other marketing strategies and tactics, right? It's the same thing that, the same energy that you need to put into it.
Yeah. And I think it's also I think that's why it's important that we talk about the changes, because if you don't realize that things have changed, you cannot adjust how you strategically go and execute. And if you don't do that, you're going to be left behind, right? So just as an example, in marketing, there's a lot of talk about consumption of website. So specifically, if you look at Google search, they've been really great at building currency conversion, find your flight. All these things are now being built in, so you don't need to leave Google. And that creates a dilemma, obviously, for those marketers who wants to leverage that channel. And if you don't adapt, you're not going to be able to extrapolate the value. And so let's maybe get into some of the things that's changed specifically for outbound.
Yeah.
You talked a bit about on the defensive, there's a lot of tooling that's started to rise. And certainly probably also for the offensive side, outbound, there's new mechanisms and things that can be leveraged.
Yeah. I think number one, as for many, many, many things, most of the basics are still the same. And, we can do an episode on all the fantastic new things that are happening, and they're all exciting and so forth. But I do actually think most of the basics, if you don't nail them, if you don't get them right, I think all of this nicely, sprinkling on top kind of thing, it's not going to work out actually, right? So I think number one, getting the right people in place, getting the right process in place, making sure you have the ICP, reaching out to them in the right way, yada, yada, all of that stuff, you need to get that right before anything else, right? And then I think on the, what should be different is, yes, you will need to probably start using some of the tools that are out there simply to help your SDRs be quicker at what they otherwise would be doing anyway, right? And big part of the SDR job, in my opinion, is actually research. Yeah, is actually trying to understand who is this potential buyer, why is it a potential buyer, what might she be interested in, what is she thinking about, what are her problems right now, how can I break through right now, what could be the hook here actually. And it's very similar to writing a LinkedIn post. What's the hook of my audience today? Yeah. You think about it and then you put it out, and then you maybe it works, but this is really in a one-to-one kind of channel. And I think then the last piece, and this kind of the new cool chatter about outbound and in any kind of form, is kind of this whole pattern interrupt idea. I'm not sure if you came across that already. Yeah. It's really the hey, let's, you need to do something, you need to say something that doesn't make you look like, or doesn't directly identify yourself as a outbound kind of conversation. And it's not in a shady, hey, I don't want to show my true intent way. It's more in a, oh, I didn't expect that kind of way, right? And many people are now kind of taking this concept and building it even into the cold call. You want to, the first thing you say, and needs to be the pattern interrupt, and then someone is like blocking away, and then you pattern interrupt again. It's like, I don't know, everything is pattern interrupt these days. But those are some of the newer tactics that are coming up.
But I actually think so. Pattern interrupt is a nice little hack, right? And probably it's always been something, just has a little bit of a different flavor today. I think the research part is where it gets really interesting, right? Because over the last couple of years, more and more data has become available, but people also more actively promoting what they do. If you talked about LinkedIn as an example, right? And the other day I had a SDR cold email, and I get a few a week and I instantly forget them. But this one I remember because he or she, I can't remember, clearly did their homework. He had been trawling my LinkedIn, researching, grow blocks as well to figure out what is it we do, what stage are we at. And he had basically taken a line from one of my posts, which was my hook in that post, and used it as his subject line. And this email was not the classic, hey, he has a Google Doc where there's insert first name here, add a bit of personalization in this line, and then blast it out. No, he had tailored it for me specifically, right? And that's, I can't remember the last time I replied to an outbound email. It's been a while, but I replied to that one. It was, unfortunately for him, a no, we're not interested at this stage. But I bet if he circles back in the future and it is the right time, then it's going to be very different.
And I agree. And thinking this one step further, thinking about scaling something like that. All the red alert lights go off, like, oh, how do you scale this? Right? That seems difficult. And the first step here is, okay, the kind of people we want to hire for that specific role, it's different from I'm going to make 50, 60, 70, 80 calls a day, and I'm cool with that. Yeah. And it also puts way more pressure on the enablement side, on the onboarding side, right? Let's just say you have a different kind of person sitting there now as an SDR. Maybe that is more research oriented, and maybe that is a bit more switched on in the market and the product and what the problems could be. But you still need to help them with, hey, those are the problems. This is the best approach. This is the ICP. This is how you should go about it. And this is how the ICP splits into its 10, 20, 30 different variants. I don't know. That might be a thing. And here's now a playbook how to approach it. And I think that is very, very different from, hey, here's the script. And by the way, scripts work. If anyone is, oh no, scripts don't, we're not robots. And, we have kind of similar discussions also here at Growblocks about some of these approaches. But scripts do work in the beginning in terms of getting someone, sounding very much onboarded very quickly. And then, the script fades out. But basically in this newer world and this different approach, most of these scripts now, they're basically useless, right? You can't create 50, 60 highly tailored scripts or anything. It doesn't work like this anymore. No. So you need to teach structure instead. And you need to teach, you almost need to go in and have an inside sales manager or a coach that almost says like, okay, let's take this email here apart. Let's take this phone call apart. Yeah. Why did it not work? Right? And do learning through that. I think that is just a completely different thing from, and by the way, I've been guilty of that myself. How many calls did you make today? Yeah. I still love that question, by the way. But it's just a different thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you should deal more with outcomes, right? That's ultimately what it is. And sure, the amount of calls is an input. But I think to your point, it's fair to say that starting with a script makes sense and then initially it fades out. And actually using the research as a way to cut through better. That's the key. And at the end of the day, you want to create a dialogue. You don't want to just talk at people. You want to talk with them.
Yes. And I'm, maybe one thought on this whole input effort dilemma. I think it's totally worth it to have that conversation, honestly. And the reason here is if you are hitting your numbers, great. If you're not hitting your numbers, the manager will have a conversation with you, and he or she might be able to then point out and say, well, one of the things you can improve is the number of calls, activities, emails, things you do in a day. Yeah. And I think that's totally fair. Paying someone or judging someone based on number of calls that they made, probably that's not the right approach. But completely shying away from using that as a thing that, you know, needs to be discussed between an individual and a manager, I think that's also wrong, right? And yes, I've been in that meeting and I've been the one saying it. Hey, meetings book this down across the board, and see there, number of calls, number of dials is also down. I'm not saying it's a causation here, but it looks like a correlation. So please, dear inside sales manager, can you please pull up those calls? I'm sure the meetings will follow. And it's not, everyone knows it's not as simple as that, but those two things are connected. Let's not forget about it.
So it used to be easy, is almost what I'm hearing with Outbound, right? It's how many calls, here's a script, here's a process, easy. And now with all this availability of data and defensive mechanisms, things have started to change, right? You basically need to be more versatile. So I think what we should spend a bit of time discussing is knowing that these are some of the changes happening when you want to build out Outbound. How should you adapt as a business? Because I think we're never married to a specific idea, but we do believe it's important to try things out and not worry about, can we scale it? You will figure that out, right? So how should businesses adapt to some of these changes we've talked about?
Yeah. So number one, I don't think that it has gotten harder necessarily. I hired like VP marketing, VP sales types that are in their 40s and maybe early 50s. And guess how they started their careers in sales? Not as an SDR, because that concept wasn't around back then, but they did either door-to-door stuff.
Old school.
That's really hard.
Yeah.
Or they had like this dial phone where you need to, with this I don't know.
You could just say a landline even then.
Yeah,
we're way back.
Let's call it a landline. But even worse, actually, they had to use public telephone booth because they were kind of a merge between door-to-door and phone. And they had to run around with basically a massive bag, really heavy, of quarters. So this is in New York City, this is in the US, because quarters is how you operated those phones, right? And honest, I'm sorry, the sales and outbound job is not that tough actually anymore. It's tough in a different way, totally. But I'm just saying it's, I think that's what I mean, right? You kind of have advances on the one side, and then you also have advances on the other side. And I think that stays the same throughout time, it feels like. I think the way to adapt here is, number one, figuring out what is it that actually works with your ICP and your buyer persona. I think this is, number one, and getting really clear about this is step one in this process. And I feel many people building outbound teams, like skipping over that fact. Yeah. They're like, here's a phone, here's a lead list, go. And you can be super lucky, or you can just wait a long time and have some random person that you just hired off the street figure this all out for you, which I don't think is actually fair, to be honest. This is a thing that someone senior in the organization, doesn't need to be the founder, but someone senior in the organization needs to figure out for you, right? And then the next step is, maybe for some of those people, the old script works. Calling them just as much as possible. I was part of a hospitality SMB, and writing them emails wasn't a thing. Calling them was the thing. Yeah. And then that's maybe the channel that you should use, and then you should totally use it. And you should maybe do as many calls as you can per day. And then that's the strategy.
So you're saying on the basics you apply, you need to figure out what is at play, basically.
Yeah. Yes. And you know what that play could look like? What everyone is now saying doesn't work anymore for that specific buyer persona, for that vertical, for that segment, whatever it is, right? So and creating that clarity in your mind, I think that's really important. And then obviously trying to playbook it and then teach it to the guys actually doing it. That's the important piece. And then number 3, you might be running into the realization that with your specific buyer persona, let's just say sophisticated B2B marketeer in a SaaS company, that the outbound call doesn't work, right? And then, what's the playbook then, right? And maybe instead of then hiring folks that are really good at placing 80, 90, 100 calls a day, or dials actually, attempts, just attempts, by the way. That's the number. It's not actual calls. Maybe then, they need to almost be more like a mini LinkedIn influencer, right? Maybe this is almost what those folks then maybe need to do in order to attract someone like yourself and be interesting for what you do, right? And sure, they will still be able to use email and phone and all of those supportive, supplementive channels, but the starting point might be somewhat different. In your case, it might be LinkedIn, and I think those kind of adaptations, that's really what you need to think about.
This is such a great example, right? Because I saw on I'm not going to name the community, but there was a community where there was a sales channel, and they talked about, hey, after you connect with someone on LinkedIn, how long do you usually wait to reach out with an email? And I was like, oh no. Because to your point, you're absolutely right. If you're building up your profile as an SDR on LinkedIn, consistently sharing advice and connect with your ICP, number one, they will see that and you will start building up trust, but you can also start engaging with them, which is going to be way more powerful. So I think if you did that consistently for a month with someone who is your ICP and then go and reach out, because you believe now potentially it's relevant based on the research, you're going to cut through way better.
I think so too. It's whenever, for Grow Blogs, for example, let's just say we have 5 SDRs. I think that strategy is totally going to work, totally going to do that. But then you think, okay, and maybe that's not Grow Blogs, maybe that's one of our customers. We need 100 or 200 SDRs. Is that strategy going to work for that kind of scale? And I'm not so sure about it. I think it could, but it will require like something completely different.
Yeah.
And I think, once you're at that scale anyway, I think what we in our little LinkedIn echo chamber and B2B SaaS echo chamber are forgetting about are the 95% of other people that are not on that platform, that are not active as we are, that sit in normal jobs where the phone still works, by the way.
Yeah.
And it's, again, right, you need to adapt, you need to figure out what works for what buying persona, you need to be really thoughtful around that, and you need to help reduce all the meaningless brain killing tasks that SDRs are having, and you need to enable them to do some more stuff. And by the way, they also want to do all of that stuff, while not forgetting about the basics. Because at the end of the day, yes, it is, I would still argue it is setting that meeting. It is creating this, hey, someone needs to listen to me or a sales rep for 30 minutes minimum in order to educate, in order to discover, in order to do whatever you're doing. That still needs to be the outcome.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you said earlier is also it almost changes the jobs that exist within the organization, right? If you're sitting in revenue operations, if you have an SDR team that all of a sudden needs to do more research, it changes the whole enablement of that team, right? So I mean, it's a really hard job being in sales. I have tremendous respect for them, and when you sit in marketing, you deal a lot in the clouds, and sales is really in the dirt. Are you reaching out? Are you being thoughtful in your approach? And you need to deal with rejection. And marketing, we work on a project 2 months later, then we'll know, right? So it's a tough job. No,
and I think what you're describing there is one of the biggest friction points between sales and marketing. Honestly.
Oh, totally different episode.
No, but funny question actually. Before we sign off here, where should SDRs report into? Is it marketing or is it sales?
I'm not good enough, I think, at coaching and managing SDRs. So I think that will be really hard.
Yeah.
I think you really need to understand the job they perform. And if I were to manage an SDR myself, I actually would require myself to do some calls.
Yeah.
And I deal really poorly with rejection.
That's it. There you go. Thanks, Mikkel.
Well, that was good. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Take care. Bye.
Bye.